Here's an op-ed I wrote about President Trump just before the 2020 election. Across the United States, historians are worried. Indeed, many of us are filled with a deepening sense of dread about the direction in which this country is headed. Because while historians can't predict the future, we also can't help but see in current events certain patterns, continuities, and examples from the past that suggest how things may play out. Many of us see President Trump and his right-wing allies steering this country towards a form of authoritarianism that will end American democracy as we know it. It's on account of these dark visions of the future that nearly every historian I know says they have not slept well in ages. As historians, we are frightened when we see a president routinely demonize the press as the, quote, enemies of the people, because we know that waging war on journalists and an independent press has been the norm in authoritarian regimes that seek to stifle free speech, dissent, and criticism. As historians, we are sickened when we see a president brand his political opponents not simply as misguided, but as illegitimate actors who want nothing less than the total destruction of the nation. We know that authoritarians have long used this tactic to gain power and then justify one-party rule. As historians, we shudder when we hear a president extol an imagined and idealized past, MAGA, when the nation allegedly stood tall, proud, united, and strong. We know that authoritarians have always used this kind of weaponized nostalgia to dupe their supporters into believing that they will somehow magically restore their nation to its past greatness. As historians, we are alarmed at seeing a president speak favorably of white supremacists, while echoing their accusations against immigrants and people of color for being the source of their poverty, misery, and insecurity. We know that authoritarian regimes in the past have successfully used this tactic to mobilize their supporters, often with deadly consequences. As historians, we are distressed when we see a president who, despite never showing at any point in his life that he was a man of faith or one who took religion seriously, present himself as the defender of Christianity against godless secularists. We know that authoritarian regimes have long exploited religion to lend their regimes an aura of righteousness, which in turn they use to justify any outrages they commit. As historians, we are horrified when we hear a president say that if he is not reelected, the nation will be destroyed. We know that authoritarians have retained power by conflating their own political fate with the fate of the nation. We also know that authoritarians have used this claim to justify all manner of illegal, immoral, and inhumane actions against their political opponents. As historians, we are appalled when we see a president who spreads conspiracy theories that suggest that he is the target of a diabolical secret plot to overthrow him. We know that authoritarians routinely employ conspiracy theories to alarm and mobilize their supporters against the regime's opponents, often with violence. The philosopher Voltaire explained this formula with chilling succinctness. Quote, "Those who can make you believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities." As historians, we are dismayed when we see a president urge heavily armed white nationalist militias take actions on his behalf, be it attacking peaceful protesters, confronting public officials about pandemic policies, or intimidating voters on Election Day. We know that yet another hallmark of authoritarian regimes has been the encouragement of extrajudicial violence by loosely affiliated paramilitary groups and militias. This is only a partial list of historians' concerns. We also see signs of creeping authoritarianism in the president's lavishing of praise on some of the world's foremost dictators in places like Russia and North Korea, his stacking of the federal judiciary with partisan loyalists, his attacks on science and expertise, his use of violence against peaceful protesters, his obsession with gaudy displays of nationalism, militarism, and strongman posturing, his promise to impose a patriotic history that whitewashes the dark and shameful chapters of the nation's past, and his claim that if re-elected, he should be allowed a third term or more, despite the two-term limit imposed by the 22nd Amendment to the Constitution. Historians reject the idea that history repeats itself. And we also know that trends do not lead to a certain outcome. But it's hard to see what we see, knowing what we know, and not be worried, really worried, about the future of American democracy. And again, I wrote this op-ed in October of 2020. And now here we are, on the verge of that much-feared second Trump term. Better buckle up, people. And if you care about human rights and democracy, it's time to get busy.